I found an abandoned baby on the street and called 911. But when the police arrived, one said, "You match the suspect description." I asked, "What suspect?" He answered, "The person who left her." My name was already in the system. But I swear, I've never seen that child before. I had worked overtime, again, because my boss, David, was a prick who never acknowledged the difference between helping out and being taken advantage of. So instead of going home at a reasonable hour, kicking off my shoes, and pouring myself a whiskey like I had planned, I was dragging my exhausted through the cold streets of Portland at almost midnight. My neighborhood wasn't exactly the safest, but I'd lived in the city long enough to know which streets to avoid and which shortcuts save time. I took one of those shortcuts that night, a narrow alley behind a row of closed shops, littered with old newspapers and the occasional rat. It wasn't pretty, but it was direct. I was halfway through when I heard it. A noise so soft I almost missed it. A baby crying. I stopped, looked around. The street was empty. The crying was faint but desperate, sharp and shaky, like the little thing had been wailing for a while. It sent a shiver through me that had nothing to do with the cold. I followed the sound to a dumpster near the alley's edge. I don't know what I was expecting, probably a cat, maybe a SHTTY prank, but what I wasn't expecting was a tiny baby wrapped in a thin, dirty blanket, lying inside a broken cardboard box. I froze. My brain struggled to process what I was looking at. For a long second, I just stood there, heart pounding, cold air burning my lungs. The baby was trembling, her little face scrunched up and red from crying. Who the HLL would do this? I crouched down, swallowing the lump in my throat. Hey, little one. I murmured, my voice softer than I'd ever heard it. "It's okay. You're okay." I wasn't even sure if that was true. My hands shook as I reached for my phone and dialed 911. I gave them my name, my location, and told them I'd found an abandoned baby. My voice cracked on the word baby. The dispatcher's tone was calm and professional, but I could hear the urgency beneath it. "An officer is on the way. Stay with the child. Keep her warm if you can." I wasn't sure how to do that. I wasn't a father. I'd never even held a baby before, but I pulled off my jacket and carefully wrapped it around the tiny, shivering body. Her cries softened a little. "Chill, you're okay," I whispered, more to myself than to her. The minutes dragged. I kept glancing around, half expecting someone to jump out of the shadows and claim her. But no one came. Then, finally, flashing red and blue lights filled the alley. Two uniformed officers stepped out of the squad car. One was tall and lean, with sharp features and a buzz cut. The other was shorter, heavier, and looked like he'd seen one too many late-night shifts. I let out a shaky breath. Thank God. "Over here." They approached, their expressions unreadable. I expected them to take the baby, to ask if she was hurt, to do something. Instead, Buzzcut looked straight at me and asked, "What's your name?" I blinked. "Nick Holloway. I'm the one who called. You matched the suspect description." My stomach dropped. "What? The person who abandoned her?" I almost laughed, but their faces were serious. "Are you insane?" I snapped. "I just found her. I called you. Why the HLL would I do that if I was trying to abandon her?" The shorter cop, Ramirez, spoke into his radio. "Suspect in custody." "Custody?" Before I could react, Buzzcut grabbed my arm, twisting it behind my back. Cold metal snapped around my wrist. "Handcuffs." I jerked back instinctively. "What the HLL?" "You're coming with us," Ramirez said flatly. I was too shocked to move. "You're arresting me?" The baby was still crying. I turned to look at her, my jacket swallowed up by her tiny frame, and the only thought in my head was, this isn't happening. This can't be happening. But it was, and I had no idea why. They didn't throw me in a cell. Not yet, anyway. Instead, they sat me in a gray interrogation room. Metal table, stiff chair, the whole we think cure criminal setup. For a while, nobody came in. I sat there, wrists aching, mind racing. Then, finally, the door opened. A woman walked in. Late 40s. Sharp blue eyes. Hair pulled back, so tight it probably gave her headaches. She had an air of authority about her, the kind that made you sit up straighter whether you wanted to or not. She sat across from me and placed a thick folder on the table. Her badge read, Detective Regina Holloway. She didn't say anything right away. Just study me. I broke the silence. "Look, I don't know what's going on, but this is a mistake." She slid a piece of paper across the table. A birth certificate. My name was listed as the father. I felt the blood drain from my face. And then I saw the mother's name. Emma Sinclair. The air left my lungs. I hadn't seen that name in over a decade. We had dated in college. Nothing serious. Just a few wild months before she moved on to bigger and better things. She had been impulsive, unpredictable. The kind of girl who burned bright and fast, leaving destruction in her wake. We hadn't spoken since. But now, somehow, I had a daughter. I looked up at Holloway, my mouth dry. This has to be a mistake. She didn't blink. Is it? I haven't seen Emma in 10 years. My voice cracked. I swear to God, I didn't even know she was pregnant. Holloway leaned forward. Then maybe you can explain why an anonymous tip came in hours before your 911 call, saying you abandoned the child. I stared at her. My pulse roared in my ears. I don't know, I whispered. And for the first time in my life, I wasn't sure if that was a lie. I was released. Not because they believed me, because they didn't have enough to hold me. But now I had a bigger problem. If that baby was really mine, why had Emma never told me? And if she wasn't mine, then someone was going to great lengths to make it look like she was. Either way, I needed answers. So I found Emma's last known address, Seattle. I packed a bag, and I drove. Because if she was behind this, I needed to know why. And if she wasn't, then someone was framing me. And I sure as HLL wasn't going to let them get away with it. The drive to Seattle was the longest 3 hours of my life. I barely noticed the city lights when I arrived. My hands were gripping the steering wheel so tight they ached. My mind was racing with too many questions, too many scenarios, and not enough answers. Was the baby really mine? If she was, why the HLL hadn't Emma told me? And if she wasn't, then who wanted me to take the fall for abandoning her? My gut was telling me this wasn't random. Someone wanted me involved. Someone wanted to ruin my life. But who? And why? I parked outside the last known address I'd found for Emma. It was an older apartment complex, 3 stories high, brick facade. It looked decent. Nothing fancy, nothing rundown. A place for people just trying to get by. I sat there for a minute, staring at the building, my heart hammering. Then I got out. The hallway smelled like stale coffee and cheap air freshener. My footsteps echoed as I walked to apartment 207. I stood in front of the door, hesitating. Then I knocked. Nothing. I knocked again, harder this time. Still nothing. I was about to turn away when I heard movement inside. A soft creak. Then a voice. Who is it? I froze. I knew that voice. I hadn't heard it in 10 years, but I knew it. Emma. Silence. Then the door opened, just a crack. A single blue. I peeked out. And the second she saw me, she went pale. Nick. Her voice was barely a whisper. I felt a knot tighten in my stomach. She didn't look happy to see me. She looked scared. Can I come in? I asked. She hesitated. Then, slowly, she unlatched the chain and stepped aside. I walked in. The apartment was small, cluttered, but not dirty. A coffee table covered in old magazines, a half-empty bottle of wine on the counter, a pile of folded baby clothes stacked neatly on the couch. I turned to face her. Emma hadn't changed much. Her dark blonde hair was shorter now, her face a little thinner. But her eyes? They were exactly the same. Sharp, guarded. Nick, she said again, as if she was still trying to believe I was standing there. What the HLL are you doing here? I laughed, but there was no humor in it. Funny. I was about to ask you the same thing. She crossed her arms. You have a daughter. I cut her off. And my name is on the birth certificate. Her face went white. I stepped closer, lowering my voice. Emma, I found a baby in a goddamn alley tonight. I called 911. And the next thing I know, the cops are cuffing me and telling me I abandoned her. She swayed slightly, like she might pass out. I clenched my jaw. Tell me the truth. Is she mine? Emma swallowed hard. Then, barely above a whisper, yes. I felt like the floor had been ripped out from under me. I took a step back, my head spinning. I had a daughter. A daughter I never knew existed. A daughter who had been left in the cold to die. And, somehow, I was the one being blamed for it. I exhaled sharply. Jesus Christ, Emma. Why didn't you tell me? She looked away. I couldn't. What the HLL does that mean? She ran a hand through her hair. It's complicated. Try me. She hesitated. Then she turned and grabbed a manila folder off the counter. She tossed it onto the table between us. I frowned. What is this? Everything you need to know. Her voice was tight. Just read it. I opened the folder. Inside were documents, court papers, legal filings, and then a restraining order. Against me. My blood ran cold. I scanned the papers, my pulse pounding. My name was all over them. It claimed I had THR-ed her, Hare-ed her, tried to take her baby. It said I had a history of violence. I felt my stomach turn. This is bullshit. Emma bit her lip. Nick, I never did any of this. I shouted, slamming the papers down. I haven't seen you in 10 years. What the FCK is this? Tears welled in her eyes. I didn't file it. I stopped. My breathing was ragged. My hands were shaking. What? She swallowed. I didn't file it, Nick. Someone else did. I stared at her. I don't understand. My voice was hoarse. How does someone fake a restraining order? Emma wiped at her eyes. I don't know. But 2 years ago, I got a visit from a lawyer I'd never met. He said he represented you. Said you were trying to claim custody of my daughter. I shook my head. That's insane. I know. Her voice was barely above a whisper. But Nick, I believed it. For a while, I really believed you were trying to take her. I ran a hand over my face, trying to process this. So what changed? She hesitated. I got a call last week from a blocked number, and Emma took a shaky breath. They told me it was time to finish what we started. A cold chill ran down my spine. What the HLL does that mean? She looked at me, her blue eyes wide with fear. I think someone wants you in prison, Nick. I felt my heartbeat in my throat. Someone had gone to insane lengths to frame me. Someone had manipulated the system, lied to Emma, forged legal documents, and worst of all, they had left my own daughter in the street, knowing I would find her, because they wanted me to be blamed. I exhaled shakily. Emma, who else knew about the baby? She hesitated. Then she whispered, only a few people. I clenched my fists. Boo, she swallowed. Then, barely above a whisper, my sister. I froze. Emma's sister, Lydia. The same Lydia who hated me. The same Lydia who always told Emma she deserved better. The same Lydia who had mysteriously inherited their family's trust fund after their parents died in an accident last year. It was just a theory, but my gut was screaming. I took a deep breath, my jaw tight. Where is Lydia now? Emma hesitated. Then, quietly, she said, she's in Portland. My blood turned to ice. Lydia was in Portland, the same city where I had coincidentally found my daughter in the middle of the night. The same city where the police were already convinced I was guilty. And, suddenly, everything was starting to make a sick kind of sense. I sat back, running a hand down my face, my mind spinning with possibilities I didn't like. Lydia, of all the people I could have suspected, she wasn't even on my radar. But the moment Emma said her name, things started clicking into place. I had never liked Lydia. She had never liked me. From the start, she had treated me like I was beneath Emma, like I was just a temporary mistake in her sister's life. Back in college, she'd been the perfect older sibling, the responsible one, the successful one, the better one. And she had made damn sure I knew it. But this was beyond just hating me. This was calculated. Emma hugged herself, avoiding my eyes. Nick, if she really did this, I don't know why. I let out a humorless laugh. I can think of a few reasons. The trust fund, the fake legal filings, the fact that Emma believed I was trying to steal a baby I didn't even know existed. Lydia had been playing a long game, setting things up for years. And now, the final piece had fallen into place. Someone had called Emma last week, telling her it was time to finish what we started. That meant whatever Lydia had been planning was already in motion. And that baby, my daughter, had been left in an alleyway for a reason. Someone wanted me locked up, and they almost got what they wanted. Emma finally looked at me, her blue eyes shining with guilt. Nick, I swear, I didn't know. I held up a hand. I believe you. She swallowed. So what do we do? I had spent the past few hours thinking I was alone in this nightmare. But now, Emma was staring at me like she wanted to fix what had been broken, like she wanted to help me find the truth. I exhaled sharply. First, I need to know everything. Did Lydia ever meet the baby? Emma hesitated. Once. A long time ago. She wasn't happy when she found out I was pregnant, but she said she'd support me. Then we just stopped talking about it. Convenient. I nodded, my mind working. And did she ever offer to help? Money, babysitting, legal advice, anything? Emma frowned. She did mention getting me a lawyer once. Said she knew someone who could make sure the past stayed in the past. I didn't think much of it at the time, but her eyes widened. Oh my God. What if that was the same lawyer who gave me the fake restraining order? Bingo. I pushed back from the table, pacing the small apartment. Lydia had money. She had connections. And apparently, she had a plan. Now, I just had to figure out why. Nick. Emma's voice was soft. I stopped pacing. Yeah. She hesitated. Do you want to see her? It took me a second to realize what she meant. The baby. My daughter. The thought sent a jolt through my chest. Something raw and unfamiliar. I had spent my whole life thinking I didn't want kids, that I wasn't meant for this kind of responsibility. But when Emma led me down the hall to a small bedroom, and I saw her, curled up in a crib, breathing softly, tiny fingers twitching in sleep, something inside me shifted. She was so small, so fragile, and someone had wanted to throw her away like garbage. My hands curled into fists. I wasn't going to let that happen. Not now. Not ever. Emma's voice was barely above a whisper. Her name is Violet. Violet. I let the name settle over me, branding itself into my mind. Then I turned back to Emma, my jaw tight. I need to go back to Portland. Her eyes widened. Nick, you just got out of a police station. What if they're still watching you? I didn't care. If Lydia had set this up, then she was already ahead of me. She had spent years making me the bad guy in a story I didn't even know I was part of. I wasn't going to sit back and let her win. I need to find out what Lydia's next move is, I said. If she's in Portland, she's not finished yet. Emma hesitated. Then I'm coming with you. I blinked. Emma, she's my sister, Nick. If she did this, I need to know why. Her voice wavered. And I need to fix this. For you. For Violet. There was no arguing with her. So a few hours later, as the first hints of sunrise broke through the Seattle skyline, we packed up everything we could and got in the car. Back to Portland. Back to the city where my life had just been turned upside down. And back to the woman who had orchestrated it all. Lydia. The drive back to Portland was tense. Emma sat in the passenger seat, quiet, her hands fidgeting in her lap. I could tell she had a million things running through her head, same as me, but neither of us spoke much. What was there to say? We were heading straight toward the person who had been pulling the strings all along. Lydia. I still couldn't wrap my head around it. She had never liked me, sure. But this? Setting me up for child abandonment? Trying to ruin my life? That went beyond hate. That was personal. And the worst part? I had no idea why. The sun was just creeping over the city skyline when we pulled into Portland. I hadn't slept, but I wasn't tired. My adrenaline had been running too high for too long. I had one mission now. Find Lydia, get the truth, and make damn sure she never got away with this. Emma had been texting someone during the drive. I hadn't asked who at first, but now, as we parked outside a small coffee shop in downtown Portland, she finally spoke up. She's staying at a hotel near the Pearl District. I turned to her. You got that out of her? Emma shook her head. No. I asked her aunt. She mentioned Lydia was traveling and staying in Portland for a few weeks. Emma swallowed. She didn't say why. My grip tightened on the steering wheel. That meant Lydia wasn't just here for a visit. She had a reason to be in Portland. A reason that, somehow, involved me. And Violet. Emma hesitated before adding, she's at the Fairmont Hotel. Room 714. I didn't ask how she got the room number. Emma had her ways. I just nodded. We had a lead. Now, we had to figure out what the HLL to do with it. The Fairmont was one of those high-end hotels that made guys like me feel out of place just by walking through the lobby. Everything smelled expensive. Leather, fresh flowers, some kind of subtle cologne that probably cost more than my rent. I kept my head down as we made our way to the elevators. Emma was tense beside me, her arms crossed, her shoulders stiff. As soon as we stepped in, she pressed the button for the 7th floor. Neither of us spoke. The doors slid shut, and the elevator hummed as it carried us upward. My pulse pounded in my ears. We had no idea what we were about to walk into, but I had a feeling that after today, nothing would ever be the same again. When we reached the 7th floor, Emma hesitated for half a second before stepping out. We walked down the long, quiet hallway. Room 714 was at the end. Emma stopped in front of it. Her fingers hovered over the door for a moment before she finally knocked. A few seconds passed. Then, the door opened. Lydia stood there, dressed in silk pajamas and a hotel robe, her dark hair perfectly styled despite the early hour. And when she saw me standing beside her sister, she didn't even blink. She just smiled. Nick, she said smoothly, as if we were old friends. I was wondering when you'd show up. The HLO? I expected shock. Maybe anger. At the very least, surprise. But Lydia? She looked amused. Like she had been expecting us. Like this was all part of the plan. Emma stiffened beside me. Lydia, she said cautiously. We need to talk. Lydia sighed dramatically. Of course we do. She stepped back, waving us inside. Come in. No need to make a scene in the hallway. I hesitated. Every instinct in my body screamed trap. But I needed answers. So I walked in. The hotel suite was just as fancy as I expected. Floor-to-ceiling windows with a perfect view of the city. A minibar stocked with top-shelf liquor. A king-size bed that probably felt like sleeping on a cloud. Lydia moved gracefully, pouring herself a glass of orange juice from a crystal carafe. Then she turned to us with that same smug smile. So, she said, sipping her drink, where would you like to begin? I clenched my fists. Why did you do it? She raised an eyebrow. Do what exactly? I took a step closer. Don't play games with me, Lydia. My voice was low, controlled, but there was pure rage boiling under the surface. You faked a restraining order. You convinced Emma that I was dangerous. You left my daughter in an alleyway and called the cops on me. Emma flinched beside me, but Lydia? She just laughed. A light, almost musical sound. Then she tilted her head and said something that sent ice through my veins. Oh, Nick, you're still so easy to manipulate. Emma gasped. I felt my heartbeat hammer in my skull. Lydia smiled wider. You really think I just left her there, waiting for you to find? She shook her head, almost pitying me. No, no, no. I just made sure you were in the right place at the right time. My blood ran cold. You set me up. Lydia took another slow sip of her drink. You were always going to take the fall, Nick. It was just a matter of when. Emma's voice was shaky. Why, Lydia? Lydia sighed, as if she were bored of the conversation already. Then she leaned in slightly, lowering her voice to a whisper. Because you two ruined everything. I felt my breath catch. What the HLL was she talking about? Before I could respond, Lydia continued, her tone sharp, cutting. I spent years fixing our family's reputation. Years cleaning up the messes Mom and Dad left behind. And then she pointed at Emma, got knocked up by him. She turned to me with pure disgust. A nobody, a waste of space, someone who didn't deserve to be part of this family. Emma shook her head. Lydia, that's insane. Is it? Lydia arched a perfect eyebrow. I warned you, Emma. I told you what would happen if you didn't get rid of it. But no, you had to be stubborn. And look where it got you. She gestured around the room, her eyes narrowing. No trust fund, no inheritance, no power. You threw it all away for this. She sneered at me, and I had to fix it. A cold realization crept over me. This was about money? My voice was hoarse. Lydia smiled. What is it? My jaw tightened. Emma was trembling beside me. You try to ruin Nick's life over money? Lydia let out a soft chuckle. Oh, Emma. She stepped closer, her voice dropping into something colder, more venomous. I wasn't trying to ruin his life. She looked straight at me. I was trying to erase it. I felt a sharp, twisted kind of rage claw up my spine. Lydia wasn't just cruel. She was calculated. And if I didn't stop her now, she was going to win. Emma looked like she was about to be sick. Her hands were clenched into fists, her breath shallow. I took a step closer to Lydia, my muscles coiled tight. You set me up. You threw a baby into an alleyway just to frame me. My voice came out sharp, deadly. Lydia didn't even flinch. Instead, she sighed, like I was a child who just didn't understand the rules of the world. Nick, let's not be dramatic. She was never in any real danger. I made sure someone would find her. I just guided the situation in the right direction. I could barely process the words. You. I exhaled sharply, fighting the urge to grab her. You used an infant as a pawn in whatever twisted game you're playing? Lydia tilted her head. It worked, didn't it? The room felt suffocating. My hands were shaking, my vision narrowing. I dealt with a lot of horrible people in my life, but this was another level. Emma finally found her voice. Lydia, how could you? I'm your sister. Her voice cracked. You let me believe Nick was dangerous. You stole years from me. You made me think I had to, she broke off, pressing a hand over her mouth. For the first time, Lydia's expression wavered. A flicker of something almost human, then it was gone. She set her drink down on the marble counter and smoothed her silk robe. Emma, don't be so emotional. You were never going to have a good life with him. I just gave you a push in the right direction. Emma blinked at her. You lied to me. Lydia rolled her eyes. And you believed it. That's not my fault. Emma looked like she had been slapped. Something inside me snapped. I lunged forward, grabbing Lydia's wrist before she could step away. Her eyes widened for a split second. Then, like flipping a switch, she smiled. There it is, she murmured. I froze. Lydia leaned in slightly, lowering her voice so only I could hear. That temper, Nick. The same temper that made Emma so afraid of you. My grip tightened instinctively. Then I realized what she was doing. She wanted me to lose control. She wanted me to explode, to give her an excuse to call security, maybe even the police. I forced myself to let go, stepping back. Lydia smirked. Good boy. I want to break something. Emma stepped between us, her breath shaky. Lydia, stop. Lydia sighed. I really don't see why you two are making this such a big deal. Everything worked out fine in the end. She turned to me. You're out of jail. Emma still has her mistake. Emma gasped. Her name is Violet. Lydia blinked, then let out a quiet laugh. Of course it is. I clenched my fists. Why now? Lydia looked at me, genuinely confused. What? Why pull all this now? Why come back to Portland? Why push for the final nail in the coffin? For the first time, Lydia hesitated. And that's when I realized she wasn't as in control as she wanted us to believe. Something had changed. Something had made her desperate enough to take the risk of coming here, of tying up whatever loose ends she thought were left. Emma noticed it too. She stepped forward, her voice lower, more cautious. Lydia, what's going on? Lydia scoffed. Don't be ridiculous. Nothing's. A loud buzzing sound interrupted her. Her phone, sitting on the counter, vibrating violently against the marble. Emma and I both glanced at the screen. A message popped up. Unknown number. Where are you? You promised this would be handled. Lydia moved fast, grabbing the phone before we could see anything else. But it was too late. My heart pounded. She wasn't working alone. Emma swallowed. Who was that? Lydia plastered on a smile, but I could see the tension in her jaw. Just a work thing. I stepped closer. Bullshit. She rolled her eyes. Nick, honestly, you have this bizarre idea that everything revolves around you. Not everything I do is about you. Emma crossed her arms. That message was about us. Lydia's smile was starting to crack. Then, after a moment, she sighed dramatically and placed her phone down. You're right, she said, her voice casual. I was working with someone. Emma and I both stiffened. Lydia took a step toward the window, gazing out at the city. But I'm afraid that's not your concern anymore. The hairs on my neck stood up. What does that mean? Emma asked, voice unsteady. Lydia didn't answer. Instead, she turned back around, her expression cool and unreadable. Then she spoke 5 words that sent ice down my spine. You should leave. Now. Emma and I exchanged a look. Something was wrong. Then, a knock at the door. Lydia smiled. I turned to Emma, heart racing. We need to go. She hesitated for half a second, then nodded. We turned and bolted for the hallway. Behind us, Lydia laughed. Good luck, Nick, she called after me. You'll need it. I didn't stop, didn't look back, because whatever was waiting on the other side of that door, it wasn't good. We sprinted down the hall, my heart pounding harder with every step. I didn't know who was at Lydia's door, but I knew one thing for sure. Whoever it was, we didn't want to meet them. Emma's breath was ragged beside me as we reached the elevator. I slammed the button, willing the doors to open faster. Nothing. The sound of Lydia's door unlocking echoed down the hall. SHD. Emma grabbed my arm. Forget the elevator. Stairs. We turned and ran toward the stairwell, just as the door to Lydia's suite swung open. I didn't get a good look at who was on the other side, but I heard a deep male voice mutter, "Where are they?" We slipped through the stairwell door and bolted down the steps, 2 at a time. I kept my voice low. Emma, who the HLL is she working with? I don't know. She shook her head. But we need to find out fast. By the time we reached the parking garage, I was drenched in sweat. We rushed to my car, my hands shaking as I unlocked it. I jumped into the driver's seat while Emma scrambled into the passenger side. I started the engine and peeled out of the garage, my tires screeching against the pavement. Emma twisted in her seat, glancing behind us. I don't think we're being followed. I let out a shaky breath. Not yet. I gripped the wheel, my mind racing. Lydia wasn't just some rich, spoiled manipulator. She was playing a game way bigger than we'd realized. And if we didn't outsmart her, we were going to lose. We drove in silence for a few minutes before Emma finally spoke. We need leverage. I glanced at her. What? She was staring straight ahead, her expression hard. Lydia's always been untouchable because she controls the narrative. She's smart. She's calculated. But if we find something real, something that proves what she did, we can take her down. I gritted my teeth. And how the HLL do we do that? Emma exhaled. We go to the source. I frowned. The source. She turned to me, her eyes filled with determination. We find out who she's working with. It took us a few hours, but we finally found our answer. Turns out, Lydia had tangled herself up with some pretty powerful people. Business executives, investors, and politicians who weren't interested in being exposed. And one name stood out above the rest. Gerald Whitmore. Billionaire. Real estate mogul. Known for covering his tracks. And, according to some very interesting emails Emma managed to dig up, Lydia's business partner. The pieces started falling into place. Lydia wasn't just trying to ruin me. She was cleaning up a mess. Years ago, she had used family money to get involved in one of Whitmore's shady real estate deals. It had gone south big time. And now, she was trying to erase anything that could connect her to the fraud, including me. Because, as it turned out, my name was in the documents. She had forged my signature on several contracts, making it look like I had been involved in the deal. If the feds ever came knocking, she'd have a convenient scapegoat. And if I ended up in jail for child abandonment, even better, she could wash her hands of the entire thing. But now we had the proof. Emma and I sat in the car, staring at the screen of her laptop. The email thread between Lydia and Whitmore was all there. Plans, payments, mentions of my name. It was enough to blow her entire world apart. I clenched my jaw. We have her. Emma nodded slowly. Yeah, we do. I turned to her. So what now? A slow smile spread across her face. Now, she said, we make sure she knows it. We waited until late that night to make our move. Lydia thought she was untouchable. We were about to prove her wrong. Emma sent the documents to a few key people, investigative journalists, legal contacts, even a few business rivals who would love to watch Lydia fall. And then, just to twist the K&F a little more, she sent them to Lydia herself. With a simple message, your move. The fallout was spectacular. Lydia tried to fight it, of course. She denied everything, claimed she was being framed. But the evidence was airtight. Her connections started pulling away. Whitmore himself distanced himself immediately, throwing her under the bus. Investigations opened. Lawsuits followed. And within weeks, Lydia's world crumbled. Her accounts were frozen. Her assets seized. She lost everything. And the best part? She had nowhere to turn. She had burned too many bridges. She had spent her life controlling people, manipulating them, using them as pawns. And now, when she needed someone to save her, there was no one left. I got a call from Lydia a few weeks later. I let go to voicemail. She didn't leave a message. I figured she knew better than to ask me for help. Emma and I sat on the couch that night, watching the news as another segment aired about Lydia's downfall. Emma turned to me, a small smile on her lips. It's over. I nodded. Yeah. For the first time in years, I felt free. No more looking over my shoulder. No more lies. Just a future. For me. For Violet. For Emma. And this time, no one's going to take it from me.